Getting ready to go live now. Good. We're going to go live this week. And we are live. It's Dr. J here with Evan Brand. Evan, how are we doing today, man? I know in the pre-show, we're going deep into the adrenal, thyroid, gut microbiome connection. How are we doing, man?
I'm doing really good. Yeah, this is trippy. You know, people talk about the gut-brain connection, but when you actually look into the papers on this, you actually just found a paper that was from just a few months ago that we'll have to dive into on gut-brain, adrenal connection, thyroid, cancer, all being tied into the gut. So, where do you want to start?
Yeah, so there's one article. I just want to read the summary of this article. I think this really shows you the connection of the microbiome with the thyroid. And of course, we have some scientific articles looking at the microbiome with the HPA axis and connecting to the adrenals. So this is really, really powerful. I just saw this one conclusion here and I really wanted to highlight it because I just think medicine is just really going in a totally different direction. So the title of this article here, I'll read it all for you all here, is Dysbiosis of the Gut Microbiome is Associated with Thyroid Cancer and Thyroid Nodules, and they're correlated with thyroid function. And essentially, we know that autoimmunity, which is the #1 cause of thyroid issues with almost all people, right? That is a major association with cancer and with nodules, of course. The major cause of thyroid nodules are going to be autoimmunity. But the conclusion of this study was interesting. They found our results indicate that both thyroid cancer and thyroid nodules are associated with the composition of the gut microbiome. These results may further support a clinical diagnosis to a great extent and helping in developing potential probiotics to facilitate the treatment of thyroid cancer and nodules. So conventional medicine in the Journal of Endocrinology starting to come to the conclusion that, hey, we may need to have probiotics to treat thyroid cancer and thyroid nodules. That's pretty amazing.
That's a trip. That's a trip. Well, I've got another paper I was looking at here that was about babies. So let me read this one because this is pretty interesting and kind of up the same vein here. That this was looking at 78 infants who were premature and were in the NICU. And it was found that the infants that had dysbiosis, which they just call an abnormal gut microbiome, they had more gut issues even at age 4 of age. They followed these kids for 4 years. And if their gut was screwed from day one, even 4 years later, they still had gut issues. So not related to thyroid, but just crazy how much the stress of the mom, the diet of the mom, the microbiome of the mom, if the mom doesn't have enough good bacteria, not giving good bacteria to baby. This is crazy. I don't want to get too off topic from thyroid to babies, but there's countless papers coming out on, even there was another one I looked at too, which was about sun exposure.
Right.
And this sun exposure paper was looking at people getting UVB, as in Bob, UVB light exposure. And they had significant changes with their gut microbiome, but it only worked in the patients that were deficient in vitamin D. So there's this, you know, our mutual friend, Jack Cruz, he's always talking about sunlight, sunlight, sunlight. Everybody get sunrise, get your skin exposed to the sun. It turns out, yes, that is totally true because in various studies, living in higher altitudes means there's a higher risk of developing inflammatory bowel disease and MS because at a higher latitude and higher altitude, both, you get less UV light. So now there's this gut flora sunlight link as well, but it only was in vitamin D insufficient patients. If the vitamin D levels were normal, the sunshine didn't do as much to boost the gut bacteria.
Interesting. Very good. So I want to just kind of connect the dots here with some of the more valuable intel. So in the study that I just looked at, where they're talking about potential probiotics to treat thyroid nodule and of course, thyroid function issues and thyroid cancer, the couple of things to highlight is, what does that mean? So dysbiosis typically means a higher amount of bad bacteria in relationship to good bacteria. Now, in this one study, just kind of giving people the take home, is the bad bacteria they were looking at, that were higher in these cancer patients, was the Streptococcus and the Neisseria bacteria. And the beneficial bacteria was the lactobacillus. And they also looked at the Butyricmonas. And Butyricmonas, I think, is just bacteria that helps make butyrate. And butyrate is the same fat that's in butter. Okay. So eating healthy butter and things that help improve butyrate bacteria could be very beneficial. Also, anything that's going to be fermented that's going to give you healthy levels of lactobacillus and support butyrate is great. So those were the big bacteria they were looking. So, I mean, these studies are limited because you're not looking at a whole suite of bacteria, right? Or a whole suite of positive probiotics. So these studies are still a little bit myopic in their focus, but I think it still gives us a little bit of insight that probiotics, beneficial bacteria, are important, and some of the dysbiotic bacteria can have negative implications, even affecting your immune system and even cancer. So I think it's good to keep that in the back of our head. So when we're seeing patients, we're recommending comprehensive gut testing that's DNA based, that's looking at all kinds of normal flora imbalances, dysbiotic balances. We're measuring it to the umpteenth degree, because the DNA testing is about 2,000 to 3,000 times more sensitive than your typical stool testing. And then we're also looking at infections, because the bigger thing here, I think, is we could have an H. pylori issue or a fungal overgrowth, or we could have a major parasitic infection that could be throwing off the bacteria too. So sometimes the bacterial issue isn't necessarily the root cause. It's an effect of something deeper in the gut that's kind of going wrong. And then also we have to look at the fact that gut stress and gut inflammation can throw off digestion. And when our digestion's poor, we're not ionizing minerals. We're not breaking down our selenium and our zinc and our magnesium. We're not breaking down protein as well. We're not absorbing all the hormonal building blocks like cholesterol and fatty acids and protein and fats to make our hormones and our neurotransmitters. So you can see this isn't just an isolated issue. It spirals off into other systems not working well. That's why you need someone with a clinical picture or clinical eye for this, like me and you, to dive in deep and kind of spiral off the intimate connections and how and why this is a big deal.
Well, I love that this paper exists, because between you and I both, we've put a combined 15 plus years of education and content about gut and how important it is and how it affects every other body system. But you still have people that go to their conventional doctor and they'll say, hey, my guy I'm working with, Dr. Justin, told me that my gut is affecting the thyroid. And the endocrinologist says, no, it doesn't. No, your hormone levels are just low. We're going to bump up your Synthroid. We're going to give you extra T3 in supplemental form and blah, blah, blah. And they never bring up the gut. Well, now here's the proof in the pudding. Here's the paper that proves what we've been saying the whole time. So it's good. I didn't need the validation, but I guess for our ego's sake a little bit, when you get good results with people, and we've seen countless time and time again that the thyroid antibodies and Hashimoto's go down when we fix the gut. I've always loved seeing that, but now we have the proof to be able to show why this is working.
100%. And I saw a patient just from a few years back. Her antibodies were well over 2,000 regarding thyroglobulin, and they were around 30 now. So, I mean, you're looking at a 99% reduction with thyroid antibodies. And I've seen that quite frequently. And people listening, it may not be practical to get your antibodies down even below the reference range or even negative or to zero. That may not happen. But if we can have a 50 to 90% reduction regarding those antibodies, that's going to be huge.
Let's move on. Let's go into this other paper that you had sent me. This was the one that was from Frontiers in Cellular and Infection Microbiology. This was a 2017 paper. It was called Microbiota Modulate Anxiety-like Behavior and Endocrine Abnormalities in Hypothalamic Pituitary Adrenal Axis. Let's go into this, because this is another freaking awesome paper that proves what we've seen with regarding mood and the whole adrenal connection tied into the gut.
100%. So if we go into what was the name of that study again?
This is the one. I'll put it back in the chat for you here. This is the PubMed one. This is
I have 10 of them up right now. What's the name of it again?
Go check your chat. I just put it in your chat on Zoom. This is the one that's called Microbiota Modulate Anxiety-like Behavior. And so I'm going to go into kind of the bottom section of this, where it's showing all the pictures here about the connection between, you've got your cortical hormone, your ACTH, you've got the metabolic effect picture here. And what we're finding is the microbiome, the gut, your microbes, your intestinal microbes, they are changing this whole brain gut axis activity. And
Hmm.
all of your gut microbes are responsible for your dopamine, your GABA, you've got histamine, you've got acetylcholine, and regulating the function of the CNS, which is your central nervous system, and the stability of the HPA axis. This is the crazy part to me, this last part of the sentence, that the intestinal microbes regulate the stability of the HPA axis. Because when we talk about the kind of this brain adrenal connection, we just talk about like adaptogenic herbs and
Right.
meditate and deep breathing and extra ashwagandha and all that, and maybe you need some L-theanine, which is all cool. But if you're just doing that, you're missing the boat. You're missing the fact that the gut is going to overpower any effort on your brain. It's like, oh, I'm going to go do yoga to calm my nervous system. You can't if your gut microbes are screwed.
Exactly. I want to highlight one sentence in this study conclusion. I think it's vitally important. They say here imbalances of the HPA axis can cause by intestinal microbes. So now this study is kind of submitting to the fact that the microbes are causing HPA axis imbalances could affect the neuroendocrine system in the brain. That's the brain talking to the hormonal system primarily through the adrenals and the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic, result in anxiety like behavior. And the study suggests that intervention into intestinal microflora may provide a new approach for treating stress like diseases. That is profound. They're
That's pretty
talking
awesome.
about altering the microbiome. Typically, that's going to be done in two ways. It's going to be done by killing or knocking down dysbiotic bad bacteria or supporting beneficial good bacteria. Those are the two modulatory ways to do it. So that's amazing. The fact that conventional research, yet no one even talks about this on the conventional medical side, partly because there's about a 20 to 30-year lag between stuff in the literature making its way into conventional medicine. And there needs to be a profit motive. So if a big pharma company cannot patent what's happening here, we probably won't see this be applied, because there's got to be a reason to spend billions of dollars in research and get patents. And if we can't patent it, what are you going to do?
Yeah. So like the $30 bottle of probiotics that we sell after we do some type of a gut killing protocol. I mean, 30 bucks is it. Your profit margin's not going to be like some of these cancer drugs, for example. They're like 1,000 to 10,000% markup. You'll have like one vial of chemotherapy that's 10,000 bucks.
Yeah, and it's not just the money you make on it, it's the ability to guarantee that you're the only one that can produce it. So if you get the patent and you're the only one that can produce it, then you can artificially make the price higher, right? So that's kind of how it works. There's not a natural profit, like a 50% markup or something like in a lot of stores that you see is going to be thousands of percent markup, and it's going to be artificial due to patent law.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, you're talking rather than 20 companies all making the same thing and charging 100 bucks. If you're the only sole guy, then you're allowed to charge 10,000.
Yeah, you can charge a lot of money for it. Yeah, that's how it works. That's how you saw that with the EpiPen when the patents went out. Only one company had it, and they jacked it up. And that's how it happens. So the more we can use things that are natural that can't be patented, then you have a little bit more market force keeping the prices down. So that's nice.
Yeah.
So interesting. In this study, they also talk about, however, the precise mechanism of action of how intestinal microflora remains unclear. So it's really interesting. There's some known pathogenic mechanisms, I think, with a lot of the infections causing problems. My guess, all right, my intuition really comes at it from the perspective of intestinal permeability. I think the intestinal permeability aspect is a big one. I also think a lot of the good bacteria has a modulatory effect on your immune system, because we know your immune system is in the gut. So if your immune system is hyper-regulated or hyper-stimulated, that can do a lot of different things, from increasing gut permeability to just sucking up a lot of resources for energy. And I think it also has a negative impact on your mitochondrial function as well. And then I think the low-hanging fruit is you may not be digesting, absorbing, and assimilating a lot of the key nutrients in your diet, which go to make other systems work, like your mitochondria, like your thyroid, like your adrenals. If we're not getting enough selenium, we may have thyroid issue. We're not getting enough magnesium, we may have issue with our mitochondria. So we need a lot of these nutrients. And if we have stress or interplay with the HPA axis and our gut, there could be some absorption issues for sure.
We should almost just title this podcast, which we already came up with a better title that you're seeing, or you already clicked on to download this, which was like the microbiome adrenal thyroid link. But really, we should call it "Yoga Ain't Gonna Fix Your Gut." I mean, that's basically the
Right.
summary here.
Right. And again, there's a lot of data on this where the stress in the gut and stress in the brain is bi-directional. In other words, stress in the gut can create brain stress, but stress in the brain can create gut stress. And we know this because high levels of cortisol, stress in the brain, that makes ACTH, adrenal corticotropic releasing hormone, that stimulates the adrenals to make cortisol. That can create gut permeability at high levels. It can break down the gut barrier. And we know stress in the gut through number one is gluten is a big one, can easily create gut permeability, which can then also create gut stress. So these are important things. Quick study I want to pull up here. I did not shoot it to you, but this is called dietary gluten-induced dysbiosis can create issues with the tight junctions. And that's the summary of the title. The title is really convoluted, but in
Give me
other
that
words,
one. I want to have that link and bookmark it myself.
yeah, I'll send this to you right now so you have it. But this is fascinating. And basically, they're talking about gluten having a major impact on the gut bacteria and creating a dysbiosis. And we know with dysbiosis that can affect the whole neuroendocrine HPA axis cascade of things. And they talked about dietary gluten had effects on the Streptococcus family, the Lactobacillus family, the Corynebacteria family. Really, really, really interesting and how it affects different things. It downregulated the gut's absorption in a lot of different ways, created inflammation. So there's a lot of different potential cascades that happen when gluten comes into the equation. And so the low-hanging fruit that we talk about is kind of getting patients on a paleo template, which is a grain-free, dairy-free, legume-free template, and then potentially even moving towards a paleo template where we're going grain-free, legume-free, dairy-free, no nuts, seeds, nightshades, and eggs.
Yeah, you may have to go the autoimmune. So here's the point that we're trying to make is that the people who say, oh, I eat gluten and I feel fine. It's not about whether you feel fine. It's about that internal biochemistry that's changing. It's about those microbes that are changing. Also, in that study that you just sent me here, it was talking about Prevotella being affected too. We know there's a huge link between Prevotella and joint pain. We did a whole podcast on joint pain, functional medicine. And so it's not that like, hey, you have to get a rash or you have to break out in acne after you eat gluten. That's not, it's a lot more subtle, but the subtle changes over time change the whole system.
There's a lot of people out there that I hear, I won't mention their names, but their podcasts out there that say, hey, you can have gluten if you have it and you don't have any symptoms, you're fine. The problem is the inflammation that's happening here may not create a symptom. There may be a delay in the symptoms that occur. And that's kind of the myopic level of thinking. You can't go to that conclusion. Well, if you don't have symptoms, you're fine. In this one study, they're looking at inflammation associated with the microRNA. So they're looking at inflammation at the RNA level. I mean, that is a very myopic level, very, very microscopic level, I should say. And in this study, they had some people on a gluten-free diet and some eating gluten. And they saw on the gluten diet, they saw this increase in inflammation at the microRNA level, which is pretty profound. So it may take time to manifest into actual symptoms. And we know there's data on the fact that there are people that even if they aren't celiac or even really gluten sensitive symptomatically, they still saw permeability with their gut when exposed to gluten. So kind of my general recommendation is try to be grain-free all the time, especially if you have an autoimmune condition. And if you're going to cheat, try to choose a gluten-free cheat if you can. Now, if you don't have a known autoimmunity, then maybe you choose a little bit of gluten here or there, but be very careful with it. Try to do things like extra enzymes with DPP4, maybe some extra activated charcoal and glutathione to kind of deal with the stress and the inflammation associated with that. You can also add in some extra glutamine and things to help with the gut lining. So these are some ways that we can mitigate it. So I tier things, hey, known autoimmunity, no gluten ever. And if you're going to cheat, try to make sure it's gluten-free. If you're relatively healthy and no autoimmunity, then maybe you cheat a little bit with gluten, but try to make it a special occasion, holidays, birthday, etc., and then try to use things to blunt the negative consequences that may occur.
Yeah, well said. People aren't even aware of that we have some little cheats in our pocket, especially that we'll give to people around the holiday season, different enzyme formulations that can actually sort of break up or reduce the effect of some of those food allergens, like your dairy, your corn, your egg, your soy. You can use enzymes to help break those apart, but we don't want people to get hooked on those or use that as a long-term solution, because then you're still cheating and it's not going to be reducing the impact 100%. It's just going to blunt it, as you said.
Exactly. And one thing I wanted to highlight, I saw this article come across my desk too. It's a compound called tributylene. And tributylene is in the chemical paint that they paint on the underside of the hull of the boats. And this compound is getting in the water. And they're finding that this compound is actually an obesogen and it negatively impacts the gut microbiome. And then you're getting exposed to this in the waters. So I think this is really important why we need to be filtering our water, because it's possible that these compounds may not be filtered out with conventional filtration processes. And these compounds are an obesogen and they affect your microbiome. So another great reason why you should head over to our sites, get a good high quality water filter that we personally use, evanbrand.com or justinhealth.com/water. I'll put the link in the description. Water is a big component. There's a lot of chemicals and toxins, and tributylene is just one compound that could negatively impact your gut microbiome.
Oh man, that's amazing. Well, there's countless like that. I just got the Environmental Working Group's report on Louisville, Kentucky's tap water. And, people say, oh, we got voted the best tap water in the US because we've got a lot of limestone here naturally that kind of filters out our water. It was still garbage, man. There was still tons of flame retardant chemicals, the PFOA, which is like the Teflon non-stick chemicals, foams, heavy metals, pesticides and herbicides. I mean, we had countless pollutants in our tap water here, even though it was voted best and it does taste good, but you're not going to taste these part per million chemicals that, like you said, can be an obesogen or disrupt hormones. So yes, drinking tap water can make you fat and sick. Absolutely.
Of course. And then the number one thing you can do, this is a no-brainer. Most of our audience and listeners know this, is avoid glyphosate. So you really want to eat 100% organic, because glyphosate, many studies are shown to affect the microbiome. A couple of rat studies looked at different rats' microbiome and saw a significant, impact on the microbiome of these rats when exposed to glyphosate. So you really just got to be careful. Make sure you eat organic, as glyphosate, which is the major pesticide, Roundup. And again, one of the studies I have up here now, 13-week study, guess what bacteria were knocked down with Roundup?
I mean, I'm going to guess all of them, but probably lactobacillus.
Lactobacillus was the major one. It was reduced in the Roundup study. And we know that the thyroid cancer study showed what? That the cancer group had lower amounts of lactobacillus. And then when we improved it, we saw an improvement in the cancer. So we know lactobacillus is beneficial, and the glyphosate/Roundup, same name, is going to negatively impact that.
That's a trip. Well, so people say, oh, I haven't done antibiotics. Doesn't matter. You did an antibiotic in the glyphosate.
Yep, exactly. So you really want to be careful. This is another reason why you want to eat organic. There's two reasons, right? Number one, you're avoiding toxicity, which is going to affect your microbiome and your immune system. Number two, increased nutrient density. Typically, organic farming will have higher level of nutrient density because the soil microbiome will be more healthy, and the microbiome and the topsoil help the plants produce more nutrition. So more nutrition on one side, less toxins on the other side. And even if, let's say, you don't buy what I'm saying about nutrition, just the fact that you're getting less toxins, right? Because for it to be organic, USDA organic, it has to have no pesticides in that soil for 3 years. You are definitely getting less toxins for sure.
Yep. Well, this has been fun. I mean, we could do part 3, 4, 5, part 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 on this, because this is like one of my favorite things ever. So we'll be back to talk more about, so I'm just giving you, I haven't told you this, but this is what we're going to cover next. We need to cover the gut microbiome in the issue with PANS, which is the pediatric acute onset neuropsychiatric syndrome in kids. I just sent you a paper on this one. Let's hit this next time though, because it's a whole nother can of worms, but it's about all these children that are having behavioral issues and anxiety and different problems. And it's related to certain species in the gut. And if you can shift the gut out of this pro-inflammatory state, you can calm the brain down. I mean, we basically already hit on that, but it's a little different for kids. And I've seen it personally and clinically, you have too. So I do want to get into this. And also there's talk about the specific bacteria, this ODR bacteria, and the link to autism and Alzheimer's. So, whoa, I mean, it goes deep.
I love it. Totally. What I'll do is I'll put all the links of all the studies that we talked about today in the description so you guys can go take a look at it so you can see it for yourself. It's amazing. Your conventional medical doctors aren't going to know about this stuff. And it's because of the 20 to 30 year gap between the literature and going into effect in the curriculum. And also there's just has to have a profit incentive for the big pharma. If they can't patent it, then they're not really going to use it as a modality. And guess what? As functional medicine docs, we take that up and we put that in our metabolic toolbox to help patients heal and get better. So I love it. Is there anything else you want to highlight today, Evan?
We're going to be looking into your gut if you're working with us. So if you're like, okay, what do I do? How do I investigate this? How do I fix it? I mean, we live and breathe and look at labs all day, every day. So we'd be happy to run some panels on you and take a look at your gut and see how is your thyroid function affected by your gut. I guarantee it is. How much is it affected? I don't know yet, but we could run some labs and figure it out. So if you do want to reach out clinically, you can do so at Justin's website, which is justinhealth.com. He works with people all around the world. So do I. My website is evanbrand.com. And we don't care who you work with as long as you get better. So please reach out if you need help. That's what we're here for. Don't wait till you're super miserable. We got tons of people that like buy supplements and listen to podcasts and listen to summits, and they buy 50 to 100 supplements and they don't know what the heck they're doing. You're spending a lot more money and wasting time and maybe getting sicker by doing that. So it'd be much better to have somebody that can help walk you through the process rather than you buying this probiotic and it didn't work. And then you bought that gut healing supplement and it didn't work. And then you bought this detox supplement and you felt like crap. Okay, stop doing that. Let us help you through what we found to work clinically.
100%. Also, we can get a window into the HPA axis as well using cortisol rhythm testing. So we'll measure your cortisol, which is your major stress hormone. That's the hormone that's made by or that's stimulated by ACTH. That's that brain chemical. That's the neuroendocrine connection. The brain, the ACTH, the cortisol, we can look at that rhythm, and that gives us a pretty good interplay into HPA axis function, because the data says that, as that cortisol starts to get dysregulated rhythmically, that's a big sign that the HPA axis is out of balance. And so we can use specific herbs, we can use protocols, we can work on fixing the microbiome, we can look at getting rid of some of the chemicals like we talked about. We only mentioned two today, the tributylene and the glyphosate. Mold and other toxins and metals could be another factor as well. That's another podcast of the day. So there's a big net that we're kind of looking into and trying to connect everything here, because everything's intimately connected. I hope you guys are enjoying the intel. If you're feeling overwhelmed, just feel free to reach out to us. We can help break it down. The big connection here today is stress, brain stress, HPA axis. That's the communicational feedback loop. Brain to the adrenals, brain to the thyroid. Think of that as the thermostat to the heater, thermostat to the air condition, right? Imagine you having that thermostat not talking appropriately to the heater when you want it to get hot, or the air conditioner when you want it to get cool. And that's a big, big connection. So when we talk brain stress or HPA axis, pretend like your thermostat in your house is not working appropriately. That's kind of the equivalent here.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well said.
All right. Well, if you guys enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up, hit the bell as well, so you subscribe. We appreciate great reviews. justinhealth.com/iTunes, evanbrand.com/iTunes for reviews. And let us know your comments down below, things that have helped you, things that have hurt you in regards to the HPA axis and your gut microbiome. We appreciate it. Evan, it was great chatting today, man. You have a phenomenal day.
Yeah, likewise. You too. See ya.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.